What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak, and as I was thinking about what to do for the show, it did strike me that the middle of January is a little bit of a difficult period usually for college football. I spent the majority of my weekend watching the NFL playoffs, as I'm sure quite a few of you guys did, and I kind of have some takeaways from that as well. Just coaching principles, again, that I think translate well over to what I'm trying to discuss here on the show, but I'm sitting here thinking I'm not really sure what to talk about Tulane wise or really what's going on in college football. I guess I can thank Nick Saban for starting a domino effect over the last couple of days with him retiring somewhat out of the blue. Probably was thinking of doing this for a bit, and I think probably wanted the college football playoffs to play out to not steal the thunder of that, although he kind of did indirectly, taking away Washington's head coach as a result of Alabama, and then the Arizona head coach going over to Washington. So as chaotic as December felt for Tulane fans, and as much as it felt like Willie Fritz was one of those last dominoes to fall, and what's this coaching pool kind of going to be left like, I think it just goes to show if the right job opens, a coach is going to take that opportunity. And it did really strike me, just as much as people have qualms with the transfer portal. And I think Tulane fans experienced a lot of that firsthand. It's really hard for me to argue against that when coaches can depart in the middle of January. This has definitely been a different offseason. Every single one has been, and including postseason for me as a sideline reporter for Tulane, again, with them going 2-10 that first season, and then everything that happened with the 12-2 Cotton Bowl year, which had a fun little tie-in with the transfer over today. And then this last offseason where they sustained success in the regular season, and then unfortunately, due to, I think, just a lot of circumstances, everything kind of withered away at the end, where, again, we can debate the merits of how much Willie Fritz leaving affected the players in the championship game till the cows come home. SMU also came out really ready to play in that football game. But I think, and I talked about this on these earlier episodes, and now I am back to my normal setting here. But while I was home in California, just kind of recapping what was there to take away from the bowl game. And I could have gone into it more. And I remember after the championship game, I kind of did the entire podcast episode on Willie Fritz's departure, not really breaking down kind of what went wrong in that game. And I know that there were some people that listened to the show out there that were kind of looking forward to that analysis. As time went by, the relevancy of what I think anyone could take away from both the championship game and anything of the bowl game for that matter, certainly feels very washed away, where we'd be breaking down an offense featuring wide receivers that are likely not going to be the ones starting next year. And when I say likely, Chris Brazzell was the one that was kind of the star in that game, but the wide receiver core was down a lot of chips, and Chris Brazzell's no longer on the roster. Jackson and Lawrence Key's gone. And so, yeah, if you were going into next year with that exact same kind of depleted roster and no one to shore out that depth chart and the starters for that matter, then I could see the merit in kind of looking at what went wrong in the passing game, for example. I think Michael Pratt clearly wasn't healthy, as evidenced by his decision to kind of go forward towards a Senior Bowl, probably a little bit of both and just protecting himself. But that just wasn't an offense that I think is really going to matter much next year, to be honest with you. And Mekhi Hughes was injured in that game, but I think that he all but it proved himself in overwhelming fashion that entire year. So you could look at maybe Alex Bauman's performance. But this next coming season for Tulane, you're looking at a new offensive coordinator. You're looking at a new quarterback. You're looking at now an entirely short out wide receiver core. Yes, you have Alex Bauman coming back. I don't know how that tight end room is really going to fare either, but all things considered, Tulane has really done incredibly well this offseason. The only thing I'm really curious about on the offensive side of the ball is the offensive line. You have Shadre Hurst coming back. I'm trying to kind of think if there are guys that have eligibility left that are returning, but it's not the same as when Michael Pratt, you don't have Sincere Haynesworth coming back. I don't remember about Rashad Green. I think he might have announced that he's coming back, but I really need to make a spreadsheet for this at this point. You still have some big holes there. And left tackle, Cameron Wire is moving on. And Shadre Hurst was really that kind of plug-in piece on the depth chart. I'll be curious to actually see kind of where he ends up next season, because frankly, he could play all over the line and did so last year, playing both guard positions very well, and at times right tackle, switching around with Trey Tuggle a little bit in place for those starters, Josh Remitich and Rashad Green. And then Prince Pines on that left side, who's also not returning. I'm getting there, guys. At left guard, he is kind of just, had a lot of injuries towards the end. So you have all of those question marks in terms of what the offensive line is going to look like, who's snapping Ty Thompson or Kai Horton, however that shores out the football next year. Center is an extremely underrated part of the offensive line, the offense. And really, when Michael Pratt came back last year, I wasn't surprised at all to see that Sincere Haynesworth was returning with him, even though that was kind of that surprise part of it. I think that that really is the most important relationship of all for a quarterback, at least because if you don't get that snap off and you don't set your protections, it doesn't matter what chemistry you have with your wide receivers, what schemes you have, what improvisation you're able to do, especially going on to the NFL, where you're just not going to have that much time in the pocket like you would in college. So to me, it's really the offensive line. And I'm not entirely sure what that looks like for Tulane next year. But if I'm reading just the tea leaves and looking at how things are going for Tulane in this offseason, it's safe to say that they've gone nowhere but up. And so, again, when I go back to how that kind of felt the Monday after the championship game and this kind of emotional void of, even though I think there were some valid hurt feelings at the time, maybe I think now that the dust has settled a little bit, some time and distance has been done and some moves have been made for Tulane. Because at the time of Willie Fritz's departure, now Tulane's just existing in a vacuum where you're looking at your coach move on elsewhere and you don't have a long-term plan in place. And the transfer portal window, the same reason that coaches have to make these tough decisions and leave their teams earlier than they might want to, that same thing then unfortunately applies to the team that they've left. And even more so in the transfer portal rules where your head coach departs and you have that extended window to enter the transfer portal. You hear guys say all the time how much they come to programs to play for the coaching staff. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of the time, that's the head coach. A lot of the time, that it's their position coach, their coordinator. And then a lot of the time, all of those kind of departures happen all at once, where the coordinator that recruited you, the head coach that came down to watch you play in high school, made a bond with you and your family, he's no longer there and you don't know who's going to be. And so I think it is easier for guys to just dip their feet in the portal and see a place that they might be able to call home with someone at the top of the ship. And then you also see the benefit in entering that and then kind of waiting to see how things play out, like we saw with Alex Bauman and Kai Horton, where, yeah, you have to have the right coach that comes in. Because if I'm correct here, unless there are just totally different rules for when your head coach leaves, a school doesn't necessarily have to honor your scholarship once you enter the transfer portal. That's kind of, not up to them at that point. Yeah, you can have that conversation with the coaching staff and they can decide to bring someone back on, but it's not a guarantee. And so there is a risk to entering the transfer portal. Otherwise, quite honestly, I don't see why every player wouldn't do so. But again, Jon Sumrall came in. He made it clear that his first pitch for recruiting was the guys on the roster, including the guys in the transfer portal. You're not going to win them all, but having Kai Horton and Alex Bauman come back just shows the impact that Jon Sumrall's had, because he's bringing in a new coordinator. And those guys are really used to Slade Nagel at this point, who I don't know if he's going to remain on at the staff in any capacity, but I believe that they have started the process of kind of the hiring on these new guys. You forget that David Harris, the athletic director, didn't actually officially start in any capacity, an official one, until January 3rd. And so the fact that it's January 15th and the last couple of days for Tulane football fans have been this exciting, I think just says a lot about the future of Tulane. And I went over all of those transfers that we saw really trickle in the last week's episode. And I appreciate you all bearing with me as I'm getting back to my regularly scheduled programming on here, just being out of town. And I think everyone just kind of taking some time to decompress from every weekend of September to December, if you're lucky, just being all wrapped up in every day of the week, if we're being honest, in college football. But Tulane has not been quiet this offseason. Again, they signed Ty Thompson over from Oregon in the transfer portal. They had Kai Horton coming back, and then that's when you can start making your real pitches on offense. I always say this about the NFL, and when wide receivers are free agents, I don't blame them for not wanting to go somewhere that they don't like the quarterback, that there's not a long-term answer there, and they can't really provide them one. If a quarterback is injured, it's not really enticing for a wide receiver to come over and play for a backup. And in this age of NIL, and where, one good transfer can really make the difference in your career, it's something that guys really have to understand what's going on at quarterback. And so what you saw today from Tulane is a really, really good sign on how that room looks to outsiders, and not just outsiders, legitimate prospects that I think would have been a fever dream thinking Tulane would ever be able to rack in these guys. So today, Tulane had Alabama wide receiver Shaz Preston commit to Tulane, and he had taken an official visit a week or two ago at this point. That's huge. I mean, that to me really says that Tulane is ready to compete with the big dogs when you're racking in guys that played at Bama that were former 5-star recruits. And then you bring over an additional wide receiver in that same breath in Mario Williams, who transferred over from USC. And I know that we're all going to make these Cotton Bowl jokes. As someone that was standing right there, because Mario Williams was the USC wide receiver who fumbled that return out at the 1-yard line that set up the safety and the comeback for Tulane. And I brought this up in shows before. It just always struck me that USC didn't have a special teams coordinator. And when you just think about how much Tulane has paid attention to special teams, and you look at the impact that Valentino Ambrosio had since taking over as kicker for the Green Wave and how big of a void that is to replace him. Also, the fact that Tulane is regularly running special teams battles where you had Will Carroll beat out Casey Glover for the punting role this year, where Casey Glover still remained the kickoff specialist, but that's a lot of attention paid to special teams. You also bring over special teams legend Greg McMahon to coach that entire unit, have an analyst under him. And then you look over at USC and you just feel bad for a kid in that moment where he didn't even have any specialized coaching at all. And special teams is something that Tulane really focuses on. Those guys aren't just going back there and have never returned a punt before. I mean, it really is such an important part of the football game. And so that, to me, really just said a lot about the importance of a well-rounded coaching staff. But another 5-star recruit coming over to Tulane, I mean, besides that moment, USC's offense was pretty much tearing up Tulane's defense for the majority of that football game. But perception for me is just as important here, where, yeah, there's going to be plenty of time to look into their tape. I'm obviously not going to have time to do that when they sign the day that I'm recording the show. And thankfully, when they come from programs like USC and Alabama, there's usually really good all-22 out there on them. So I actually am looking forward to probably being able to find legitimate film on these guys. You also had them bringing in a recruit today. Let me just make sure I have all this correct here. Jaden Lewis, who's a 4-star defensive back from Alabama, who, just visited Mississippi State, had Auburn, Ole Miss in the running, Arkansas. I mean, he's one of the highest ranked recruits that Tulane's pulled in. I think he's the highest ranked recruit this offseason, but Tulane now has multiple former 5-star recruits in their building, 4-star guys committing to Tulane. That is incredible when things just seemed oh so bleak just a few weeks ago. And the Military Bowl being this kind of miserable downpour of a rainstorm probably didn't help things, but I think it was a little easier to swallow. I mean, obviously it's easier to swallow because the championship game meant way more at that point, but knowing that Tulane was in good hands with Jon Sumrall, I think kind of eased the pain there a little bit. But in terms, again, of why there's really no point in picking over last season anymore, you have a completely different head coach, you have a completely different coaching staff, you have a new quarterback taking the helm, whoever it ends up being, and you really bolster that wide receiving core in just one fell swoop today, where I saw the defensive backs Tulane was signing over the last couple of weeks, a lot of them coming over from Troy. That's a huge position group that they had to fill, but wide receiver was kind of that other obvious one. And I'm sure that Tulane really isn't done yet there, because those two guys, let's just say they replaced Jaquan Jackson and Lawrence Keys. Again, hell of a replacement for both of those guys. We quickly saw what an injury to those guys looked like last year and really just how decimating it was for the offense. So I'm looking forward to seeing these moves kind of continue over the next couple of weeks, but why Tulane? That's just really kind of sticking out to me here, because this isn't just, oh, they're getting, really quality guys in the transfer portal. They're getting legitimate big names that I don't think Tulane fans ever really dreamed of raking in the multiples of guys coming over from the top SEC programs and Big Ten, I guess, is where USC is going. I'm trying to keep all of this correct now, but legitimate guys coming over wanting to play for Tulane in the wake of losing the most successful head coach, at least of modern times, and in running for the most important coach in Tulane history, losing arguably the best quarterback in Tulane history. Things should feel a lot worse than this. It should feel a lot rougher, but there's just clearly something in the water that's got these guys all juiced up. It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of a podcast and think, of course they like the product. Well, they're being paid to. If you know me at all, then you know two things. One, I'm truthful almost to a fault. And two, if I were in it for the money, well, then I'd certainly be doing something else. So believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location, yes, all of that. And I very much enjoyed my trip there this last weekend. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites from the smoker, fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials I continue to attest to each and every week. Go check them out. Blue Oak Barbecue, 900 North Carrollton Avenue here in New Orleans, or visit them online at blueoakbarbecue.com. They do have specials running pretty much every day of the week on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I'll give you those specials for the Tuesday and Wednesday days at Blue Oak, and then you'll get the rest of those specials on Friday. So Tuesdays, they have smoked chicken chimichanga as their special of the day, and Wednesday is French onion dip. So Friday, I'll give you a little teaser, baby back ribs, and I'll save those Saturday and Sunday specials for my Friday episode. Now, it was really easy for me to analyze things in the Willie Fritz era of Tulane football because I had so much face time around Coach Fritz and the program under him, and really understanding the identity of that team, seeing the ins and outs of the greatest turnaround in college football history, single season. I forgot something in there, looking on how to sustain that success in the era of the transfer portal, trying to come after your quarterback after a really successful season, how you turn all of that around from 2-10 and really make guys believe in what's in front of them. It was really easy for me to bolster that with personal insights and just all of the things that I'd seen, my observations. And I'll admit, I kind of feel almost like a spectator, like a lot of you guys. And it's fun in a way, just kind of swiping on Twitter and waiting to kind of see what the news of the day is. But I haven't had as much time around Jon Sumrall to really be able to say, oh, this is really just indicative of X, Y, Z kind of thing. Although, again, all of my interactions with him have been overwhelmingly positive, and I guess I've gotten a little more of that insight, being able to speak with him when he recorded that podcast with Corey Glore after his introductory press conference. And then he was down in DC for the week with us for the Military Bowl. He joined our broadcast while we were on air. So I have been able to see him a little bit. It just feels like he has an energy that players and this coaching staff are really responding to. And it stuck out to me that there's just this really kind of keen understanding of the era of social media. You look at all of the recruiting analysts, the recruiting staff on Twitter for Tulane, and you see them kind of posting every single day these GIFs of, there's a GIFs, I don't really know, of tidal waves of all of these things. And it feels a little tongue in cheek, but it gets people kind of anticipated, who's kind of coming on the roster today. It gets fans talking. It's an understanding of social media in today's age. And I just think that that's really important. Having a coach that can get with the times, that really understands the era of college football that we're living in right now, it's clearly seeming to translate on over to these players, where he's ultimately selling these guys on an unrealized dream at this point, where he has not actually coached in any capacity at Tulane yet. And as ridiculous as it kind of is to bring Tulane into the college football playoff discussion, it's definitely not ridiculous, but again, just kind of wrapping your head around the fact that Tulane's turning themselves into the top G5 contender for that role next year. To me, that's really reading between the tea leaves here, the vision that Jon Sumrall is pitching to these guys, because just to be honest, I don't know how else you sign guys like Shaz Preston and Mario Williams and Ty Thompson, Jaden Lewis, this recruit from Alabama, without that type of vision being put forward, because that was kind of the issue where Power Fives are just poaching off these G5 programs because they ultimately have a pathway to a brand name and success in the way that G5 programs just don't have the resources for. What Tulane, to me, is just doing an impeccable job at, I mean, probably better than some, if not a lot of Power 5 programs, is the NIL collective, Fear the Wave. There's just no way that these guys aren't coming over without the ability to legitimately empty your pockets here. And so this all, to me, really just puts forward a new era of Tulane football where there is no such thing as this kind of loser mentality that I think has really enveloped Tulane football for the majority of the last, 50 or something years, save for those little successes here and there, at least the last year, the years that I've been alive for that matter. And again, going to Tulane back in 2012 to 2016 to see this vision coming 10 or so years later is just kind of absurd to watch happen, but it is a reality. And now Tulane is legitimately a destination for these guys that I just don't think you could have ever seen that coming before. And so I do have to kind of wonder, what is the pitch here? And that's kind of, the why Tulane and why Tulane right now. The playoff expansion is really hard to ignore. And it was nice for once to kind of see some new blood there in the college football playoffs. I know that Michigan has made it far before in the past, but just to not have the SEC take up the entirety of the conversation in the postseason was kind of refreshing for once. And it's going to be a huge shakeup next year with a legitimate more than double, triple expansion of the college football playoffs that we're used to right now. And in that conversation is going to be a G5 program. But it's really easy to me to just start sounding kind of ridiculous and be a little too big for your britches. So there's definitely a necessary balance of realism, but being able to sell this true vision of success. And clearly Tulane under Jon Sumrall is finding a way to do so. So there's definitely, an amalgamation of the pitches by the coaching staff, the vision of the head coach, and just the identity that he's bringing to this program. And that program pitch is now bringing in 4 and 5 star recruits. And whatever issues that Tulane seemed to have in the past with getting these recruits to come over to Tulane, having the resources in order to do so, everything has really come together now. And again, being a spectator here, I can only say so much, but it's hard not to say that doesn't come from the top down, where you saw Jon Sumrall join the Pelicans broadcast, both the radio broadcast with Todd Graffinini and then was with Jen Hale on the sideline for Bally Sports. And it really stuck out to me that he said that he had 10 or 11 guys that were here from the transfer portal that he was grabbing dinner with after that game was over. That's a lot of guys here on official visits, and it's clearly big names and big fish. And it's just cool to see Tulane actually swinging for the big fish and hitting some of them. You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And I don't know if Tulane took all of these shots in the past, to be honest with you, but they're taking them all now and they're really sticking. And I just think that really comes down to, again, mentality and seeing yourselves as a bunch of winners. And my huge tie-in from this point is kind of how important that is of a mentality to be able to sell these types of guys to come play for you, because you're ultimately still fighting an uphill battle of just the perception of what a G5 program is. So you have to really be able to put forward this fact that we're not losing. We are a winning program and we're going to the college football playoffs next year. I just think a player's coach that really believes in his team and is able to really understand the pains that they go through as a former player. Most coaches are former players, but you just sometimes kind of feel that energy with some of them a little more than others. And maybe it's the fact that Jon Sumrall is a little on the younger side, being in his 40s, but he just has that air of having that football player nature to him, whatever that might mean. And the person in the NFL that I think really embodies that better than anyone and just goes to show you what you can do with belief in your program or your team is Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions. I've covered Dan Campbell over the offseason. When I started the show, I had a guy, Jeremy Reisman, come over who covers the Lions to talk about those kind of coaching traits and principles. And there's a lot that Dan Campbell does really well. Recognizing that he's not the best in the room at everything and knowing how to delegate is one thing. Being a complete psychopath on 4th down is quite another thing. But again, you need a coach that has balls, honestly. And I think it's safe to say that Jon Sumrall has them, as evidenced by what we've seen take place just since he's come over in this month and a half time, if that. It might just be a month's time, but what really stuck out to me in the Lions' success over the last couple of years was just the belief in Jared Goff and this team as not being a bunch of losers anymore, but understanding what that felt like, because Dan Campbell was on the team that went 0-16 in Detroit. And so really having probably a better understanding than some of the guys on that roster what it's like to really lose like that. And it's not the same depths of despair over at Tulane, but I think it really says something and matters that Jon Sumrall was a coordinator over here and a coach when things were going wrong. And I think that's such an important experience to have. And I think really played into Tulane's massive turnaround from kind of the pits of despair in that 2-10 year, where when everything really is going wrong, you seriously have to look inward and kind of diagnose what's in your control, what is just a victim of circumstance here, and what's things that I can do to change this destiny and this fate next year. And so being around Tulane when things weren't going right, when they didn't have someone at the top saying, what are the things that aren't in our control that are leading to us losing? Is there anything that we can do to change that factor? And if not, what are the things that we can change, and how do we kind of immediately start doing that? And I brought this up, but it stuck out to me that even in his introductory press conference, Jon Sumrall brought up the fact that when Yulman Stadium opened, Tulane's sideline was on the opposite side of the stadium, away from the home side, and it just didn't really make sense to him as a football guy. And it was one of those little ticks, those tells that told him that Tulane was not fully all in on it being a football school. And that was the time that I went there, and can very much say that it felt the same way, even though the switch over to Yulman Stadium still made a huge difference. Just being able to have the presence of mind and the memory of that, it goes to show how much those kind of little small details matter to coaches, and how much it matters to turning around an entire mentality of guys, where it isn't always about the X's and O's. A lot of the time, it's just about the psychology of the game, the small things that make you feel like everyone from the top to the bottom is bought in. And just players, coaches that can really connect with their guys and instill a belief in their quarterback and those players around them are the ones that I really see succeeding out there, where you just look at how Jared Goff has done on the Lions ever since he's had a coach that truly believed in him and makes the point to say that out loud quite often. And including in that game ball speech after they had their first playoff win in 30 something years, that just really, I think of Mike McDaniel too, talking about Tua in that manner, and just saying what a good quarterback he is and saying it publicly. You know that they're saying these things privately too, but those kind of things matter. And I think it matters even more when you're talking about college age guys and not adults that have made, $1 million, millions of dollars at that, and are doing what they love for a living as a real profession. You're still talking about student athletes at the end of the day. And so I think that belief that getting behind them and supporting them just matters so much more. And your words to me matter a lot more, because that's really what these kids are holding on to. And ultimately they're kids. So your frontal lobes aren't fully developed. You just don't have the life experience to really see the forest for the trees a lot of the time. And so that's why these guys take these coaches departing and things like that so hard, because it's, they're not necessarily grown up yet. And so it's a delicate balance to me. I think that emotions and psychology just do matter a lot more on the college football side. And what sticks out to me is getting a guy like Mario Williams, to be honest with you, to transfer over to Tulane. And again, I think that we're going to be respectful about this, and I hope he does have a good sense of humor at the end of the day, because I'm sure that those things are going to get said. But it takes kind of quite a bit to swallow your pride and know that you're going to a school where you could argue that you helped provide them that victory just that season prior, knowing that you're going to get kind of some flack for that. And just, again, having the presence of mind as this coaching staff to say, why not us? Why not Tulane? Now you kind of have the question of, why not offer really every guy that's out there? But you have to have a vision in order to sell them. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. So Tulane's figured it out. And what we've seen in just these last couple of weeks, we have these questions about, who's going to play kicker, who's going to shore out the offensive line. What does the defensive line depth look like? You also still have the spring portal transfer window coming up, where we got Cam Pesquel last season from that after losing Andre Sam in that transfer portal, and Cam Wire as well at left tackle coming over from LSU in that spring portal transfer window. It just goes to show that rebuilding in college it's chaotic, and then it quiets down. And I think that teams have a little bit more time to regroup at this point, but you're really kind of adding on to a house of cards at this point. It's probably not a great example because those tumble really quickly. So a glued together house of cards, because I can't think of another example, a pyramid. Let's just go with the pyramid here. Where now you're making these pitches to guys and have these guys on your roster in Shaz Preston and Mario Williams and Ty Thompson and these guys coming in as recruits. It just continues to build your pitch and that vision that you're able to continue reaching for the stars here. And it's just really cool to see that Tulane has a coach that's willing to just go for it. So with that, y'all, I will see you on Friday. Back to my regularly scheduled episodes with a guest here on Before the Whistle.